Pastor Ed here, back with devotions, daily devotions for Thursday, December the 28th. We've been looking at the book of Habakkuk. On Tuesday, we looked at Habakkuk 1, where the prophet cries out for help, but also seems to feel as though God's not listening. God doesn't care. Then yesterday, I read from chapter 2, where God assures him that there is a vision, and it will come. But you kind of have to be patient and wait for it. But the righteous, as God said, live by their faith. At least that's what the prophet came to understand. And so then we're going to finish up with chapter 3, verses 17 through 19, which read as follows. Again, this is God's answer. Continued. Though the fig tree does not blossom and no fruit is on the vines, though the produce of the olive fails and the fields yield no food, though the flock is cut off from the fold, there's no herd in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will exult in the God of my salvation. God, the Lord, is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer, makes me tread upon the heights. And it ends there. And I guess I misspoke. I think I said that was God's response. This is actually Habakkuk's response to God's response. So Habakkuk complains, God says, be patient, and Habakkuk finally responds by saying, that's what I'm going to do. We find that in the Psalms, especially, that in the Psalms of lament, people cry out their pain, but then they come to realize that God has been faithful in the past, and God will help them through whatever the present struggle is. Well, recently I saw a newspaper article. It said the world is too big for us. Too much is going on. Too many choices. Too much violence and excitement. Try as you will, you get behind in the race. It's an incessant strain to keep pace. You still lose ground. Science empties its discoveries in you so fast that you stagger beneath them in hopeless bewilderment. The political world is news seen so rapidly that you're out of breath trying to keep pace with who's in and who's out. Everything is high pressure. Human nature can't endure much more. Sound familiar or make sense, given the world in which we live? You would probably agree with me that makes perfect sense in terms of what we're experiencing. There's just one little problem with what I just read for you. That article was dated June 16th, 1833. Things have only become more complicated, more stress-filled, more pressure-filled since then. But to put it another way, 189 years ago, people were already struggling under the burden of increasing stress and complexity, and it's only, of course, gotten worse, much worse. O Lord, how long shall we cry for help, and you will not listen, cry to you violence, and you will not save? And of course, God's answer is wait, be patient. And then, as we heard, God goes on to say the righteous shall live by faith. We don't know when God will deliver us and make all things new, only that he will. We don't know when God's vision for this troubled world will come to pass, only that it will. And therefore we trust. And after all, that's what faith is all about. That's what it boils down to simply trust that God will one day make all things new, that God will one day make all things right. And of course, in the end, that's where Habakkuk finds himself as well, trusting in God's vision. So even though the fig trees don't blossom, we hear Habakkuk say, and even though the fields yield no food and the flock is cut off from the fold, there's no herd in the stalls, and signs and examples that all is not right with the world, yet will I rejoice in the Lord, he says. I will exalt in the God of my salvation. Well, you might wonder why this was a reading for the first Sunday in Advent, but it shouldn't be surprising because Advent is all about waiting, isn't it? Advent is about having the patience and trusting that God will one day make good on his promises, that in particular Christ will in fact return one day to finally and fully usher in God's kingdom. Until then, however, like the prophet Habakkuk, we wait. Until then, we're called to be patient. Until then, we trust. Family was once vacationing at a lake one summer. Dad had been puttering out by the boathouse. Two sons, a 12-year-old and a 3-year-old, were down playing on the dock. 12-year-old was supposed to be watching his little brother, but he got distracted, as so often happens. And the 3-year-old little Billy thought that it'd be a good time to check out the shiny aluminum fishing boat that was tied up at the dock. And so he walked out on the dock to where the boat was tied up, put one foot on the boat while leaving the other foot on the dock. But unfortunately, he lost his balance, fell into the water, which was about 5 feet deep. Well, the splash alerted the 12-year-old boy, who let out a scream, and Dad immediately came running over from the boathouse. He jumped into the water, swam down, but he was unable to see anything and eventually had to come up for air. Sick with panic, he immediately took a deep breath, went right back down into the murky water, began to feel everywhere along the bottom. He couldn't feel anything. And finally, on his way up again, he felt little Billy's arms locked around one of the dock posts, about 4 feet down. Prying the boy's fingers loose, they burst up to the surf together to fill their lungs with life-giving air. And when the adrenaline had finally stopped surging, nerves had calmed down a little bit, the father asked his son, "What on earth were you doing down there, hanging onto the post so far under the water?" And Billy's answer was a classic. With wisdom only a toddler can possess, he said, "I was just waiting for you, Dad. Just waiting for you." You see, God, our Father, is also in the rescue business for those of us who are drowning and waiting to be saved. And in that, we can trust. All right, that brings us to the end of our days of looking at that passage in Habakkuk. We're going to continue tomorrow and on Saturday with something else. Until then, take care. Bye.